like speak it out to in your voice.
Alrighty, and with that, unless there was anything else you wanted to bring up, let's get the...
Keith, you have some background now.
Yeah, there's nothing I can do about that, unfortunately.
Maybe try the new Discord noise suppression.
Is that in the settings?
It's right there above your name and a voice connected.
What do you mean it's above mine? Oh.
Oh, I see.
Anyway,
yeah.
Any questions from the people who are here now? Please go ahead and ping me.
I'm trying to figure out how to get this voice suppression thing to work. Yeah, it doesn't do anything. So this is just going to be an issue, an ongoing issue. There's not much I can do about it. So it is what it is.
For the record, for everybody who isn't aware, Keith is in lockdown. So he's in his family's house at the moment.
So yeah, if you want to go ahead with the...
I'll wait another 30 seconds if nobody went up. So Penrika wants to pose the first question. If you may, please unmute him. Or give him the mic.
Right.
Let's say it like this.
All right, Pendroker, you should be good.
Yeah, I'm good now. I have to just push the talk. All right. Hi everyone. I just wanna. My question was more about I-Novae staff recruitment strategy. For example, how was the composer Marcus hired? What that you went through to get him?
For him specifically, if I remember correctly, he reached out to us, which is not uncommon for musicians and artists. We are getting...
that actually isn't true. Your memory isn't good.
Okay.
It was recommended by Christian.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And we contacted him and we asked him what his rates were. And of course, we had a look at his portfolio and the quality of his stuff. And we were pretty impressed. So we decided to contact him and to ask if he was interested in working with us.
All right, so through a contact.
In general, most of the audio guys, it's true, are contacting us first. So in a way, Marcus was an exception.
For example, when you go now, are you trying to look for a programmer? From what I understood from Kate, that Kate just tries to run into someone, and then asks him if he would be willing.
We do a number of different things. We are trying to hire a programmer. It's hiring it within the game industry is a bit tricky. You have kind of traditional job boards all over the internet, but the game industry doesn't really use any of that. So there are some industry-specific places, and so we have registered with and we'll probably be posting an ad soon. We were going to GDC earlier this year. We were planning on going anyway, and recruiting was going to be a big part of that trip. And then obviously due to the pandemic and everything, that got canceled. So, but yeah, we are trying to hire a programmer.
Where was the GDC supposed to be located?
I think that's Pendrika. I think that's enough for you. You can still come back later.
Yeah, sure.
If you have time.
Just to answer that real quick, because it's a short answer. It's located in San Francisco every year.
It was at the end of March.
All right. So it's still open. Everyone who's listening here now can post in general if they have a question. Just ping me or post a question if they don't have a mic. We'll go ahead with a question, with the upfront question we got beforehand, which was from Crayfish. He says that he's heard you recently talk about new features such as ship customization and squad management. None of these added features will help the core gameplay, he says. Where does gameplay design feature in your list of priorities? I just go along with what questions I got first from the community, so it's just in that order.
Yeah, that's fine. If no one else has any other questions, we can certainly address that list. So I guess the core gameplay, right? Like our core gameplay, our 30 seconds of fun is epic space battles. So to say that ship upgrades doesn't affect the core gameplay, like I guess you're kind of nitpicking semantics a bit there. Like, yeah, technically the ship upgrade system doesn't directly have much to do with like a giant space battle per se, but obviously what the ship upgrade system does is it affects the loadout of various ships. It affects
the dynamics of a battle quite a lot.
Right, yeah, it affects like strategy and tactics, which all plays into, you know, how you're going to the type of experience you're going to have in your epic space battle. So I think that we would disagree with that classification, that it has nothing to do with core gameplay. I agree that in the absolute sense, you know, you're not spinning around in circles while you're or, you know, flying around shooting while you're choosing your loadout, but it does, I think, and it will have a big impact on the experience that players have while they are, you know, while they're participating in those epic space battles. So does that answer your question or the question?
I think personally the problem with the question is that it's not all that specific. Like, what is Crayfish definition of game design? Because like recently we remade a big part of the hub. Is it part of the game design? So maybe the answer is no, maybe, but it's kind of related. It's quite important for the game. So what about the mission system? Is the mission system, you know, being able to attack, defend rollers? I don't know, doing some side missions or side activity. Is this part of the game design? I would tend to say yes. And all of that is still planned. But I think personally, so this is my interpretation of a Crayfish question. I think what he had in mind when he was asking this question was more about not the individual features, but really more about the way the match, the flow is going in the match. You know, in terms of being too repetitive, in terms of having objectives that can be attacked in a certain order, in terms of focusing, you know, the player's activities in a certain area so that you maximize the amount of player interactions. And of course, all of that are also things we are looking into. So for example, I remember, I think it was 6 months or a year ago now, Matt K50 made a huge post on the forums about how he wanted, or he was suggesting more exactly to change the way the resource flow was happening. And he was explaining that a lot of the problems, you know, with the strategical elements of the game was that at the moment it is balanced so that you get a lot of credits actively by destroying enemies, by destroying a turret, modules, and so on. And so the passive credit distribution that you get from the AI commander is kind of become a second thought into the game. Like right now, we are also talking about reversing that and investigating if the game would be more interesting if we went back to a more passive approach. Maybe I think it's still important to give players some rewards, you know, for killing another player. But maybe it doesn't have to be credits. Maybe it can be something else. So we are looking into all of that, you know, how we are going to structure the long-term progression, the military rankings, maybe doing some kind of competitive ladder, the battle report, so that you can know how good or bad you have been doing in a battle. And I think it's particularly interesting to put a bit the focus on the competitive elements of the game. Because right now, it feels a bit like all the players are doing their own thing, especially when the player population is low. Players are like playing individually. And it would be very interesting, for example, if we had, let's say, a kind of list which was showing the best players on the server. You know, the best player who has killed the most interceptor, or the player who has done the most damage, or the player who has destroyed the most structures. You know, this kind of thing, like showing awards, so that players can kind of compete with each other. So all of these are things we are thinking about, and probably we will look into in the close future.
I think this is what Crayfish wanted to say. Ask. This is the difference between game design, gameplay design, and features. And I think you answered that pretty well in the second part of your answer, where you said what your thoughts about the game design and how it should factor in, and your thoughts about that. I think it answered pretty well. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're still open for questions. If anyone wants to, just ping me on in general chat here. Else we'll continue with upfront questions we've got beforehand. Here we have one from Akenbrain. It's more of a thing that has been lately came up. He says, is it possible for Keith to step down from the punching bag bad cop position? He believes that he may, Akenbrain believes that he may have been in this role for far too long, as Akenbrain thinks he has begun experiencing a mixture of confirmation bias and self-fulfilling prophecy. This is evident by the fact that it is absolutely not the case that we have our minds is set on hating us. So this one was a quote from we heard. And indeed, the last thing that Akenbrain hopes anybody in the old community wants to come across is a small contingency of salty, self-entitled jerks and trolls. A bit of a rhetorical question. This is a very long question. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot actually in there.
Let me go to at least. This is where the actual question comes. But does I-Novae think so? No, I don't think this. This is the first question already. Sorry.
Could you just summarize what you think the core thing that he's asking is? Because my takeaway is he's just asking, am I ever going to stop being the bad cop? But there's like a whole bunch of other stuff there. So maybe you could just condense that.
1 second.
Yeah.
Just 10 seconds.
Yeah, no worries.
So he says that he doesn't think we have that perception, as in the community doesn't have that perception and doesn't want to support this role of yours. And he thinks, he asks, is it possible for this situation, this bad cop, to stop and change into some other situation, something like that?
So there isn't like a formalized good cop, bad cop strategy that Flavian and I have, right? It's something that Flavian mentioned because it's something that we kind of just joke around a bit or joke about between each other. And the reason for that is just how our personalities kind of naturally are. You know, Flavian's just a bit more laid back than I am. I'm a very direct person. And so in particular, when you're talking about text-based communication, which, over the internet is obviously the vast majority of it, that directness, kind of that forwardness that I'm a bit more inclined toward, can come across as abrasive more easily. And so I think for that reason, there's a certain segment of players that tend to think I'm a bit more of an asshole than he is. And that's largely true, right? I am more of an asshole than Flavian is, 110%. And it's probably exacerbated by the fact that you just have this dispassionate method of communication via text. So I think in the general sense, I'm not an asshole. I'm certainly not trying to be, but I'm not afraid to be. And if I think people are just being overly dramatic, then I'll just shut it down because I just don't want to deal with that. And so that's kind of where that all came from. It's just a joking between us, whereas Flavian is a bit more of has a tendency anyway to be more of a shoulder to cry on, in a sense. He's a bit more sympathetic towards people than I tend to be.
Okay, so if I can say something, I think what you say is true, but I think there is another element to it, which is simply that I have a lot more time to handle everything.
Well, that too, yeah.
Because if you take, for example, the recent community drama, or for example, your answer to the open letter, you made an answer, but it was done pretty quickly, to be honest. And it's not like we did not discuss the letter. Actually, we discussed it a lot in our meetings. But the answer you made officially was just a couple paragraphs.
Yeah.
While I tend to go more into the detail, but that's mostly because I have time to do it, and Case does not have time to do any of that. So his answers are very direct and very compact in a way, which I think is not helping his case.
Well, I mean, the other thing is, to be frank, it's like I don't actually see that there's an issue with that, And obviously, sometimes we have internal disagreements on how things should be phrased and stuff like that. But generally speaking, I personally I just don't have an issue with those things. And I think some of it, perhaps, with a community as big as ours, and even within our development team, I mean, everyone's spread around the world. You also have to keep in mind that there's just going to be different cultural expectations, right? And so, we have a pretty sizable community from Europe. We have a pretty sizable percentage of our dev team from Europe. And so me as an American, and I know for a fact, Dan being a Canadian, it's kind of a running joke amongst us, just kind of how friendly Canadians are, right? And so that's just kind of like a running joke between Canada and America in general. And so there are certain cultural differences, cultural expectations that different people are going to have that always makes this more complicated. So like me personally, I have no problem frequently just giving a condensed answer. So Bobby's absolutely right insofar as it can be a time thing, but it's also just literally like I don't see it as a big deal. And other people from different countries may see that as more of a problem for different reasons. So that's always a challenge for everybody.
I think that is a pretty good answer, and thanks for taking the time to go into detail how you feel about that. I got a small question from Karachi, just out of not excluding him. I will ask it now. He just asked it while you were talking. He posted a game idea today in the forums and wanted to hear your thoughts about it, if you like it.
That's the one about getting rid of the AI commander, right?
And replacing it with player
so,
agency.
Okay, so in general, there are a lot of things we would like to do with the AI. The problem with that, in that way, I have to say that Keith is more in favor of pushing the AI. I am kind of against it. And it's not like I don't like the AI. I love the AI. I would love to do a lot of things with the AI. For example, Karacho's idea is more like, turning the game into having some RTS elements, real-time strategy games. So it's not a bad idea. I think it could even work. But the problem is that the amount of work to implement it would be pretty gigantic. And we don't really want to turn the game into something that it is not. So, like, maybe in an alternative dimension, if we really wanted to go into the RTS idea and we had a higher budget and more time, I think it would be worth, investigating seriously. But right now, I think we are already struggling with the AI. The AI, there are a lot of things we still need to do about the AI. I'm not even speaking about Karacho's idea, simply with the current context. There are, making AI bots fly in atmospheres. So this is not exactly trivial. There is a lot of work involved into that. Making the AI avoid obstacles around stations and so on. Right now, they still get stuck into stations. And trust me, I have spent days trying to fix that and to work on that. And I haven't been successful so far. So like there are a number of AI things we want to do and to address. We have been talking already for a while about the MOBA aspect of the game and how, in particular, Keith is very keen on having AI fleets assemble over time, like physically, and not just appear from nowhere when battle starts. So there would be, for example, AI fleet. The AI commander would be spending their resources on building fleets, and you would see around each location a fleet getting constructed. And then after the battle is scheduled, you would see the fleet actually start and move out in warp, and you could even attack it if you wanted. And then at some point, it would arrive at the battle location and attack it. So these are things we are also investigating, but like I would like to do a lot of things with AI, but it takes a lot of work. There is a reason why in other games there are full-time developers working for years on AI. And this is not okay. We cannot afford to work like even 6 months on the AI. So we have to limit the scope on the AI, unfortunately. but we are going to do some more work on the AI in the future, that's for sure.
Yeah, our focus on AI will primarily be around the fleet commander, and then probably much later will consider revisiting the actual like individual ship AI at a deeper
We
level.
want to do stuff with carriers also, because carriers have not received a lot of love so far.
Yeah.
There has been some ideas with carriers, you know. I think this one is something we could probably attempt at some point in the future, about having AI ships spawn at the carrier along with players. And it's possible that at some point we introduce a player commander role, you know, that could organize squads of players and assign objectives, for example, on the star map. And it's possible that the AI bots would also follow some of these objectives. But I don't want to talk too much about it because it's really at the idea stage, and it would be a lot of work to implement it. And as I said, we already have a scope problem, so I can't give any guarantee we are going to do that for the release. All I can say is that at some point we will probably try, and we will investigate. And if it's not too much work, we will probably try to include it into the game.
All right, thank you very much, Flavin, for answering that so thoroughly. There's one question before, but Jan is asking for any art-related questions, so I want to push in a question from Play Benny, who's related to that. Do you want to answer that? Do you want to pose that question? It's about the Spec Ops Interceptor.
You should unmute him.
Oh, sorry.
I think just unmute him. I think.
Yeah,
and then
sorry.
He can pose it himself.
Okay, go ahead.
If he has time, that is. He didn't really answer. Unless I will just go ahead and pose it myself. So Playbenny asks, will the Kickstarter reward Spec Ops Interceptor also have a slightly different cockpit, or will it be the same? And have you thought of basing the paint job on the very stealthy looking F-22 and F-35?
So at the moment, we have no plans to do a different cockpit texture set for the stealth or the Spec Ops Interceptor. So I think that would be something that might be cool to do later on, but insofar as our current plan and what we've budgeted, that's not in the works. We have not modeled any aspect of any of our stuff off of the F-22 or the F-35. So, or at least not that I'm aware of. Jan, I don't know, maybe you could speak more to what you've taken inspiration from, but
I'm just dropping some pics of it in the general chat right now.
Yeah, so people know what the hell we're talking about. Good idea.
Yeah. Because I spent some time modeling that up with input from both Christian and Jan and the rest of the team.
Well,
yeah.
The cockpit's textured with Substance Designer, so actually changing colors would be pretty easy to do, but like physical changes to the mesh requires a lot of work. We are hoping that we can revisit the cockpits a little bit to polish up the console area. So at that time, we can definitely look into making any changes between the Spec Ops cockpit and the normal cockpit, but I don't think so. I mean, it's a lot of work and we have a lot of stuff to do.
Yeah. The other thing too is that the actual model for the exterior is still not technically final. It's close to final, but we're gonna have to take another pass at it probably.
Yeah, then we still need to get it in game, and then we might need asset streaming because we're running into VRAM issues. So there's quite a bit of stuff we need to do before we can get it all done.
Thanks very much. So the next one is from an upfront question from Tejafas. He asks, as an old, in brackets, old new player, I find that there's much to learn with an interceptor bomber, which are the first starships to start with. I find it particularly harsh starting with an interceptor and being suggested a huge battle which will lead to quick death because of combat and higher ships. However, there's not much tutorial on combat how to choose missions, considering that there's no current videos on that and they are getting out of date. will you consider adding simple missions to start with an interceptor or getting recommended missions considering the time played chosen starship?
So this is a really interesting question because it plays into basically what we're about to do next. So yeah, we're about to kind of revamp the entire mission system along with the star map. And so this is an area that it was something we kind of just hacked into the game real quick as like a minimum viable product implementation. But it was more, the initial implementation was more of kind of like a hint of what we want to do than anything close to, a final version, a final implementation. So now that we're done with the HUD rewrite, we're actually about to start on redoing the star map and along with that, the mission system. And what we want to focus on doing that is actually kind of what he just suggested in many ways, which is it's not really clear to people what their mission is or how they go about accomplishing it in a way that's obviously, kind of successful. So what we want to do with the new star map, which of course also lists the available missions, is one, we kind of want to push missions towards the player a bit more proactively. We kind of want to suggest to them, hey, you're currently in an interceptor, you might be interested in X, Y, or Z. Two, we want to make it a lot more accessible to people, kind of what the set of missions is and why they might want to do one versus the other. And lastly, insofar as kind of the entire star map is concerned, it doesn't do a very good job of communicating what's going on right now. If you spend the time to kind of...
In general, we have a huge problem with the game right now, which is that the game is lacking feedback on what's going on.
Yeah, this whole kind of situational awareness is at many different levels a problem with the game, all the way down to like I'm just Joe Schmo flying around in my interceptor, all the way up to, hey, I'm flying a cruiser and I want to get a group of people together to create a fleet, but how do I coordinate that? How do I know what's going on in a way that allows me to communicate to people effectively? And then obviously we don't even have a squad system right now, so just being able to communicate to people effectively as a baseline is currently pretty challenging. So there's a lot of work we're going to be doing on that over the next 3 to 4 months, or at least that's the estimated amount of time it's going to take. And that is going to start with the star map and then the mission system. And so I think this will require some iteration, but I think what we're going to end up with will address many of the concerns voiced in that question, which is we absolutely agree with the fact that it's a problem. We think it's a very important problem, and we will absolutely be making it our highest priority in the immediate future.
I think that answers the question pretty perfectly.
I want to elaborate also on a little a bit, because I think half of the question was about like what to do in game to address the difficulty of flying an interceptor. But so what was the name of the person who asked the question already?
Was the Jaffas.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you mentioned something about tutorials. And I think this is very critical. This is the second half of the equation. We do not have good tutorials in game at the moment. So you know that Dan made a series of video tutorials after the launch in early access. But as we expected, they are already obsolete.
Yeah.
Like we just remade the HUD, and now every single of the videos that Dan made, which took a lot of work, are completely obsolete. Especially the ones that are focusing on the HUD, actually. So the other ones still have some things that are relevant, but all the HUD ones are completely obsolete. There is also the in-game HUD helper screen, which is obsolete, which we still haven't removed, by the way. But in general, we absolutely need to make an in-game tutorial before we release the game. We are not going to do that anytime soon, because the game is still evolving and changing, and we're adding content, we're adding features, we're iterating on the game design. So there is no point in doing that right now, but it's absolutely coming, and when it's coming, it's going to be very important, like probably critically important. So we don't really know yet exactly how we are going to do, but personally, my idea on that is that it will be related, we wanted to have the game server available to players to play offline. And so that way it would be possible to set a kind of local mini game server where a player would enter the game, where we could control that he's not getting attacked, for example. And he would receive some kind of mini missions about, move your interceptor to the left, move your interceptor to the right, fire your weapons. And we could explain the HUD, we could explain how to fly the interceptor, how to attack, how to select a weapon. So all the typical tutorial in-game things we could do into this kind of mini solo mode, if you see what I mean. But this will be a lot of work. But I think we will definitely do something like that at some point.
Great. Thank you very much. I want to repeat, everyone who's here, I think there's nobody new. Whoever has a question they want to post now, just ping me here in the general chat. Playbenny posted quite a few upfront questions, but I think we're running out. We have to skip those. But still, I want to ask him to pose one of his important questions for now, and with the information that we probably won't have time for all of them. So, Playbenny, would you please pose one of your questions?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, my question is faster than light travel still planned for release?
So I didn't quite catch that. As fast as what travels? The plan for release?
Faster
Oh.
than light travel.
Okay.
Because right now we only have one moon and it's very close together. And the original scope was for a full solar system. So it would take quite some time to travel.
Yeah, so I just want to say that FTL is not planned right now. We haven't discussed anything about FTL. But definitely we want to add more to the solar system and to have other battlescapes on other planets and moons. And so you will simply travel there with a warp. And you know the warp, when you are traveling at light speed?
Well, we have discussed this concept of jumping and having a second resource referred to as jump fuel. So
yeah, kinda, but I mean, we haven't done any development on that.
Yeah. It's so I guess the larger answer to your question is: have we discussed FTL or something more similar to that? We have discussed something more similar to that. We call it jumping versus warping. We had debated there being a secondary resource called jump fuel, but it's not something that we have really fleshed out as an idea just yet.
Yeah,
So
that's why I was saying that if we do extra battlescapes, probably what we will end up doing, because it's already in game right now. You simply go there by warping at light speed. And it will take 30 seconds to a minute to reach to another battlescape, which I don't think it's so bad. You know, if you are in game right now, you spawn at the gas giant and you fly towards the sun, it's only a couple minutes travel. So if we spread out a couple battlescapes into the solar system, you will take 1 minute or 2 minutes to travel to another battlescape.
Okay, thank you for the answer.
And you're not going to do that every 5 minutes. You're only going to do that when the action is jumping from a battlescape to another one. So presumably every once per hour or per 2 hours.
All right. Thank you very much, Playbenny. Let's switch to the next section, which is next steps that can be taken. Not really that important separation, but we have a question from Sebuka on the forums, which is if the current what is currently being worked on can be more easily shown. He suggests we are kind of know that the grand plan from the scheduling for this year, but having it clear and at a glance will be a nice addition. Using Trello, for example, do you plan anything like that, or would it be an option for you to show it more detailed what you are working on right now?
Yeah, so it's certainly something we can look into. part of our concern with that would be that, one, I mean, obviously we don't want to break down like all of our little tasks, because then we suddenly have to manage 2 task lists, and that can take quite a bit of time. 2, sometimes we're working on things that we just can't publicly divulge for a variety of reasons. And that's not an uncommon thing in game development. So it's something we will look into. I can't promise that we'll do it, but I think at least in terms of like high level roadmap, and we tend to publish our high level dev roadmaps anyway. The last one we published it in October, we updated it in January. And so obviously we've already announced that for the next few months, we plan on working on the mission system and the fleet AI and a couple other things. So those are things that I think we could absolutely put in a Trello board or whatever. And that would be perhaps a format that would be more easily consumable by everybody for just keeping track of what we're doing. So that's something we will look at. But if what he's asking for is kind of like the nitty gritty details of like, this is what we're doing over the next few days, and this is what we're doing maybe even over the next 2 weeks, we probably won't go into that level of detail for a variety of reasons.
And I also want to state something which is kind of related, which is that in general, in terms of communication with the community and so on all these things, we are a bit at maximum bandwidth. And I'm not talking about network bandwidth, of course. I'm talking about our capacity of focusing on other things. It's not a surprise that Keith is not working full-time, so he has very limited amount of time every week, which mostly go into managing the company. And that's something most of you don't really know, but there is still a lot of things going into managing the company. Handling the taxes, accounting, answering people's questions in emails. We still have a lot of people from Kickstarter who every day, wake up and ask, how do I add the game? How do I get the game on Steam? And all these people have to be answered. And I'm not doing any of that. Keith is the one doing all of that, while I'm more focusing on the game itself. But then the issue with me is that I am the only programmer on the game. So that means every single time I spend, interacting with the community, managing the community, writing this task list and so on, is sometimes I'm not spending into the game, into developing the game. So I feel like we're already, for a lot of reasons related to our budget and the number of people in the company, I don't think we can do much more than what we are already doing. Probably what we can do is to be better at what we are currently doing. But in terms of pure quantity of what we are doing, I don't think we can go any further.
Well, Flavian, that kind of brings up the question of, say, like the weekly update format that we used to do. If you wanted to mention that, maybe that you made a post on the forums recently about it.
Yeah, I already talked about that on the forums. But I feel like, in the open letter in particular, there was a part about the communication not being so good. And I feel like a good part of that is the fact that we stopped doing the weekly updates. Because if you remember, when we were doing the weekly updates, we were explaining everything that we were working on in the past week, but also what we were going to do in the next week or two, so what was upcoming. And we kind of lost that, which I think is probably part of the reason why people are feeling we are not communicating as much as before. But purely in terms of quantity, we are still doing a lot. Now we have a Steam forum to handle. So our attention is also getting onto the Steam questions, while previously we were all about interacting with the community on our forums only. But so the idea with that is that we would restart a bit. So we are not going to do weekly updates, because I feel like it's going to be hard to take a lot of time. But we could probably do at least an update every time we do a patch, so like every 2 or 3 weeks. And not only we would go into the patch notes into more detail, but we could also, expand a little bit on what we are going to do next, what are the reasons, what we are investigating, or interrogations about the game design or other interesting topics. So we could do that. And then we are already kind of doing it, but we would probably like to do it in a more formatted way, but to do quarterly updates, where every quarter we are going to go on to update the roadmap and to speak more about the long term, what is coming, what the company is looking into, for example, in the next 6 months. So we're going to do something like that. And actually, I have planned on making one of these new development updates. I think I will call that development update now, not weekly update anymore. I have planned to do one next week. So we will start on that next week.
There's one related question which would be nice to have a quick answer to. Play Benny, that's your question concerning if the artists could you please post the question? The artists could also add something to those development up.
Yes, my question is, could the artist maybe write a sentence or two if they have completed artwork that is included in the latest patch, in the patch notes when they are posted? Because sometimes you don't even realize that new art is in, and I think it's interesting.
Okay, so if I can answer that one, I think it's not actually true, because when there are art changes, I already write them into the patch notes. Like, for example, this patch we released a couple days ago. I wrote in the patch notes that there was an update, for example, on the MK6 and MK7 muzzle flash effect. In general, I have pretty much every time there was some art changes, I have included them into the patch notes. Now, what is very true is that in the recent months, there hasn't been a lot of art updates. And the reason for that is that Jan, in particular, has been focusing pretty much every single week onto the HUD updates. Because the design of the HUD, Jan made a lot of work on that. You know, the small ships, the capital ships. Until now, he's still working, for example, on the sensors overlay. So, you know, the thing with the MFD, the little boxes, like all of that was, Jan made all of that. And I simply implemented what he made. So there hasn't been a lot of updates in terms of content in the past 2-3 months, which is why in the recent patches, there hasn't been a lot of changes you could see in the patch notes.
I just want to expand on it a little bit. There are also no big ticket items anymore for us to show. So what I do right now is usually just doing lots of tweaks. Like, I know we added the TAA now, and I noticed that the projectiles are not very apparent anymore. So I will probably make tweaks to them, and they will be a side note in the patch notes. But there's no big ship to reveal or anything that we can, like, some fancy art stuff to show. It's all minor changes or design work. I guess when we get the Spec Ops skin in, like, you'll get a bigger post, but there's not much interesting for the art guys to say these days. Like, it's all boring work.
Yeah, in terms of art, there are still a number of things we need to finish. For example, Jan still has a bunch of station modules to update and to add the gribble and details. But this is long-term work. It's not like 1 week, suddenly you are going to have a big update. It's like every 2-3 weeks, you are going to get a little update to one of the station modules, stuff like that. And we still need to do a lot of work, for example, with the visual effects, the particle effects. There are still a bunch of important effects which we haven't done. For example, the burning re-entry effect in atmospheres. There are a bunch of smoke and particle effects. When we do ship upgrades, obviously, a lot of the ship upgrades or the new weapons we are going to introduce are going to have new sounds and new visual effects. So Jan is going to be working on that also.
And we also still have the majority of the backer rewards that we still have to do.
Yeah, and that's another one. There is a lot of work to do with the Kickstarter rewards.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, all the skins. So all of that is something we have already experimented with. So there are already, I think, like 10 skins in game right now. There is a whole bunch on the cruiser and one on the interceptor. But obviously, we want to ramp up on that. And we're still not doing that right now. But at some point, we are going to probably rehire Christian to work full-time on that. So in, I don't know, for 3 or 4 months, he's going to work on that. And he's going to pump up the amount of in-game content, you know, all the little tags, the decals, the skins.
Well, we haven't even added our decal system yet.
No, we don't even have the decal system yet. Yeah.
Right.
We also need asset streaming for all the skins.
Yeah, which is what I'm currently working on. Well, I'm working
So
on
yeah, so
the
on that
foundation
topic,
for
which
what
is
will become
very
asset streaming.
important. So one of the reasons we haven't added new planets or new environments is because we are limited by the VRAM. Like we have completely hit the peak usage of VRAM. And the more we add now in terms of content to the game, and the more you are going to get stuttering in game, which is going to be especially bad when you are on a 4 gigs video card. But even on an 8 gigs video card, I also have some stuttering sometimes. So like video RAM is a huge issue, which is limiting us into adding more planets, more content, and more stuff to the game right now. And we have to address that. But it's going to take a lot of time. Implementing asset streaming, Keith is probably going to start on that, I don't know, in a month or something.
Yeah, I hope.
It's going to take probably 6 months
We'll
to
see.
implement. So I would be surprised if we got asset streaming before the end of the year.
I'm hoping.
That
Well,
is an
part of-
important information to have, and
Yeah.
I think that will help a lot of people to understand why there's not more content, because it's a technical limitation.
But we want to be clear, we're not going to have tons of new ships or tons of new things that people are expecting from Star Citizen or really Dangerous. Like the scope of the game is quite limited, in fact. So
Well,
we want
to be
it
fair,
yeah.
we hope once the game is released, we can start having some more fun conversations about how do we add different, I'll call it a map, but really what it would be is like a different solar system. How do we add new solar systems, new maps? How do we add more skins, and how do we do more fun things around just kind of general content? We've bounced around some ideas for adding ships. And those are all things we would love to explore once what we promised in the Kickstarter, once that's finished. We will start having those conversations. Obviously, we also want to do modding. That's something that we think is hugely important to this game. We want to build a mission editor along with the single player sandbox. So there's a lot of stuff in terms of content that we want to do, a huge number of things. But right now, our focus is just on delivering what we promised in the Kickstarter. And once that's done, then we can start talking about some of these other things.
Yeah, we also have to keep an eye on feature creep, always.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to pose a personal question, not as a moderator, but as a fan, which is, where it's visible there's still a lot of to do until the game can progress much more. And my question is, what can be done, or what will be done with the community until then? What kind of things can be done to keep people stay engaged with the game and utilize the 2,000 people on Discord, for instance, even though the game is not there, to have more ships, more skins, or even stat tracking tools, which would be interesting to do different things like tournaments and such. What can be done in the meantime, or compensate for that?
Yeah, that's a pretty tough question to answer at this juncture. Tournaments is something we would love to do. We want to build kind of like proper and full support for clan / guild / corporation / whatever you want to call it, into our website, right? So you'll have this whole clan management system where you can create your clan, you can manage your members, all these other things, and have that also be directly represented within the game. And that way people can more easily do things like formal tournaments and stuff like that. It's obviously none of that stuff exists yet, right? This is stuff that's on the to-do list. So when you start talking about, well, what can we do right this second, then it starts getting a lot more tricky. The brilliance of Minecraft is that it was so kind of naturally viral. I remember this video I watched a number of years ago. Hell, it might be a decade at this point. There was this guy, he had just spent all this time with his best friend. He built this house in Minecraft, and he was doing this video walkthrough of it all when there was a bug in the game that allowed the fire that he had just created to escape the fireplace, and it just burned down his whole house that he was very clearly proud of that he had just built. And it was just so funny. And I had all these friends sharing it on Facebook and yada, yada, yada. And that was kind of like this beautiful viral moment that is, I think, was the key to Minecraft's success. So when you start talking about Infinity Battlescape in the near term, how do we create these viral moments that you guys in the community will kind of just naturally share.
We
and
had
starts-
one, for example, I think it was a year or two ago. I forgot who it was, maybe Play Benny, who was ramming another player. And Dan was capturing that into a video.
Well, we actually had a whole bunch in the early access with the warp ramming. So ironically, probably the most viral thing that we've done
Yeah.
was unfortunately a bit destructive to our gameplay, but everyone was like having a blast creating little videos about warp ramming, and I saw some really impressive videos about that. Unfortunately, we had to nerf warp ramming because it was breaking the gameplay. But that was probably the closest thing we've had to a viral moment, and we had to kill it. So the challenge for us in kind of the immediate thing is, given our resource constraints, how do we get things into the game to create kind of those viral moments that you guys want to share? In fact, how do we create those moments that you guys want to share without us even having to direct you to do so? Just because it was such a fun, cool experience, you just want to show it to everybody. And that's something that we think about all the time. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you right here. And the reason for that is simply we have such a small development team. We have ideas on things that we can add to the game that would aid in people kind of having these really fun experiences they want to share, but we're not at a point yet where we can begin implementing those things. And that's because our most fundamental issue, when you start going through all of our comments from our early access, is just that people don't know what to do in the game. And I mean, obviously, I already talked about this earlier with the mission system, with the star map and everything. They don't know what to do once they get into the game. They don't know how to play it. The learning curve is very hard.
That. Because we didn't say it a lot, but our refund level is actually pretty high. And if we look at the refund reasons, unsurprisingly, the number one reason is there are not enough players on the server. But like we can't force players to play the game. We can't put a gun at their face and tell them play the game. So since we cannot act directly on people being forced to play the game and to populate the server, we can only look at the second and the third reasons why players are telling us why they are not playing the game. And indeed, the second reason why people are not playing the game is because most of the time they're saying, I don't understand what is going on. The controls are too complex. The HUD is too confusing. I don't know how to get a mission. Like a lot of people are playing that. And our refund rate is pretty bad, actually.
Yeah,
which is pretty ironic, I think, because the game is actually on 80% positive ratings if you look at the Steam reviews.
Yeah,
But there is a disconnect here.
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick on, say, what could we do in the interim? With regards to, say, community events, in the past, I've tried to time it with patches and such, and for the most part, it's just been cover what's in the latest patch, and then just some casual gameplay following that. If there are members of the community that want to get a little bit more involved in those events and how we structure them, organizing a little bit more behind what happens during those events. One of the reasons that hasn't really happened at this point is we're still missing certain tools like the squad tools and some of the other features in game that will enable that kind of gameplay, like the tracking of stat tracking and stuff. So, but if you guys want to organize more structured events, fleet versus fleet composition combat, we could do like. It's difficult to control the outcome of those things, but I mean, if we want to play around with different formats for weekly events that might get more people out, and then also have a more regular schedule. I've kind of been waiting for the game to be a little bit more feature complete to really push that, but if there are a group of people that really want to engage and play around with that sort of gameplay, I'd be open to that conversation for sure.
All right, so we'll do one.
Okay, just a second. So
Sure.
in terms of community, one thing we have been considering doing also, and I don't know when we will do that, but I think it's a pretty important idea, is when there is a community event, we could have a notification in game that appears. So that, especially when the servers are at a low population, a player is just joining a server and there are not a lot of other players. But then he receives a notification that there will be a community event happening on Saturday at this time.
Yeah.
So then suddenly, this is giving some motivation for players to play at a specific time.
Yeah, embedding some sort
right
of
now the
in-game
community
calendar.
events, the community events are very community restricted. And there are a whole bunch of Steam players who are not even aware that there are community events.
Yeah.
I would say the vast majority are not aware that we do community events.
Absolutely has no idea. Yeah.
Right. So, all right. So we have time for one, maybe two more questions. We started a little bit late, so I'll give another 5 to 10 minutes for one or two more questions.
Yeah,
So,
that would be my next question if you want to extend or wrap it up. So I'll continue on the upfront questions we have here. From Crayfish, we have another one, which is, will you prepare a document that describes the rules of the game in such a way that the new player can understand them? And he poses the question because, one, he thinks he has no idea what the rules are, and I think they are far more he thinks they are far more complicated than you may realize.
yeah, we have to do kind of like a complete update of the Infinity Battlescape website. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is a bit more complicated because
I don't think it can be a document.
yeah, it won't be a document.
People download, like, people never read documents. So, like, I think
Right.
what he's saying is very true, but I think the solution he's suggesting is not going to work. I think it has to be part of the tutorials, personally.
Yeah, it'll be part of the tutorial, but there also needs to be an update to the website that will, at a high level, do a better job of outlining kind of what the game does and why you want to do it and how you do it and stuff like that. So it'll be more in marketing speak, because obviously that's just kind of the point of a game website. But there is definitely a lot of work that needs to be done on that front at many different levels. And that kind of feeds back into what we were just saying about people joining the game and they just don't know what to do.
It does also kind of enter into the in-game tutorial as well.
Right.
Which will help with that problem.
Yep. So,
but again,
all right,
because the in-game tutorials are not going to come until we are close to 1.0 release.
Right, the very end.
You're not going to get that in 3 months or in 4 months. You're going to get them probably next year.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the last things we do. I mean, we would love to do it sooner. It's just that given our limited resources, it's not something we can really afford to constantly update. So out of necessity, it's going to be deferred. So, all right, we can probably do one more question, Lamsor.
Yeah, all right. We have another one here from Akenbreen. He says, huge walls of text explaining some sort of idea or another is something that the community is good at. However, it seems like the only beneficial idea generation we can give is in reaction to a new patch. What are some gameplay questions you've been thinking about, and could you include them in your future community updates so we can elaborate on them?
Oh, geez, that's a bit of a hard question to answer. I mean, we're constantly thinking about gameplay problems.
Every week we spend God knows how much time discussing this stuff.
Right.
Well, yeah, but I mean, people are maybe not aware, but we are doing weekly meetings. So every Sunday, actually, right after this town hall here, we have our usual meeting, which is usually 2 hours. And during these 2 hours, we go first on what we have worked on during the week, and then we go over all the design topics.
I think what Akenbreen wants to say is, could you give us more input on what is helpful for you, and do you even want our walls of text we spend time on the forums or on Discord? And what is it good or is it bad, or can you use it?
It's very good. I read everything. I want to say that.
Yeah,
Case does not read everything because he doesn't have the time, but I read everything, and then I report to Case when I see some interesting ideas.
We really do like them. We really like seeing the 20-page thing that go into depth, because they're very interesting, and we discuss them a lot.
Perhaps one of the disconnects that some people might feel, right, in terms of when they write these big walls of text, is that we might read it, we might like a lot of the issues that are raised, a lot of the topics, find some of the different perspectives on things interesting. We may not be able to address what's being commented on for a period of time.
Later.
Yeah, and sometimes that period of time is actually a very long period of time. It could be 6, it could even be 8 months, or even longer, depending on what it is. So, we'll take these ideas and we'll kind of stow them away as oh, hey, cool, let's have another conversation about that later. And another thing is that our design process involves a lot of iteration, which is something that we're kind of always working to improve also. And we want to get to a point when we're refocusing on core gameplay where we can actually release patches at a much higher rate. And so we can just more quickly iterate on some of these ideas that we have and solicit feedback. Because we'll spend a lot of time talking about things, but at the end of the day, it's like, okay, we have to decide to put something in the game, and then we have to see if it works. And right now, it's kind of we're still doing a lot of initial implementations of things. The HUD has kind of been the exception to that versus the rule. In fact, when we start work on the star map and the mission system, that will also be the exception instead of the rule, because we'll be revamping existing stuff. But usually, we're building something that's brand new, and we're just trying to get an initial implementation out there, so that way we can collect some feedback. The problem is, the moment at which we release one of these new features, we already have the next thing we're going to do scheduled. So unless what's being suggested or these new ideas that we come up with for that thing that just got released can be done in a very short period of time, we won't be scheduling that work until potentially much later. And so I feel like that can be perceived as a bit of a disconnect by some people who think we release it, we just, we're not engaged enough on the feedback and on improving it. And it's not because we're not hearing what is being said or that we think it's wrong. It's just that at the point we release something, we already have a schedule in place for what we're going to do next. And depending on the scope of the work for the changes, we may not be able to do it immediately. So I hope that kind of clears some things up.
Given that you said it's a hard question, you answered pretty well.
All right, cool. All right, guys. So that's going to be it for this town hall. We'll consider doing something like this at some point in the future. And, we appreciate everyone who showed up, and we appreciate all the questions. Hopefully that helps clarify some things for many of you. Hopefully it also kind of gives you guys some insight into how we are building the game, just kind of our general development process. Dan mentioned he's recording this. I guess we'll have to figure out how we're going to make this available. Maybe we can just upload it to YouTube and try to give it a pretty background or something like that.
Yeah, I just realized that I've been recording my actual screen as well, so I don't know if I've shown secret passwords or other wonderful
You just
things.
you can just rip the audio out of it.
I'm probably just gonna rip the audio. Yeah.
Yeah, just rip the audio.
Pretty pictures in the back, like collage or something.
Right.
Make it look.
So
pretty.
yeah. So once again, thanks everyone, and thus concludes our first town hall.
Yep.
So thank you.
Coffee and tea.
Thank you very much.
There's small desserts and cookies on the tray at the rear of the building. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks, guys. That was.
Yeah, we have to go on to our next meeting now, company meeting. So we have to leave. So see you all later. Thank you.
All the best.
Cheers.